I think you just have to give yourself permission to do it badly. That was an issue for me. We talked earlier about perfectionism. My entire life, I have missed out on opportunities because I really couldn't bear to do things badly where somebody else could see them.
Hello, you are listening to the Late Bloomer Living podcast, and I'm Yvonne Marchese, your host. First of all, I just want to say, dudes, it's the end of December. Can you believe it? Oh my gosh, I really can't. This year has flown. I have to tell you, I'm pretty excited for today's guest because she is someone who was unknowingly influential in my life at a key moment a couple of years ago. This is going back to when I was really taking a look at changing my habits. I found a podcast called The Productive Woman. And Laura McClellan is the host of that show, and she's my guest today. Woohoo! I'm still using some of the tools that I discovered through her podcast a couple of years ago today. So I'm so excited to have her on and introduce her to you. But before I do, I want to remind you that I have a gift waiting for you. It's a workbook called 5 Steps to Your Midlife Reboot. It's that time of year when we naturally start evaluating the past year and thinking about where we want to go from here and what a year it's been. So I created a free guide designed to help you start taking the steps to break through that stuck in the mud feeling. You can sign up to receive it as an email series. It has some ideas and practical exercises you can use over the course of several weeks, and you can do them at your own pace as they'll be waiting for you in your inbox when you're ready for the next step. You can find a link to the sign-up sheet in the show notes. You just go to latebloomerliving.com/podcast and look for episode 29. You can also find it on my Instagram feed as a link in the bio, and you can find me on Instagram by looking up Late Bloomer Living. Okay, it's time to hear from Laura McClellan. Let's go. Hi, Laura. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. So I started listening to your podcast. I think it's probably been... I think it's been a couple of years or more that I found you. And it was right around the time that I was going through some major changes that actually ended up leading to me starting my own podcast. And some of the things that I learned from your podcast were bullet journaling, and I was really looking into how to be more productive. And there you are, the productive woman.
Yeah, it's a pretty obvious title. I guess it gives you a pretty good idea of what the show's about.
It really is perfect. It drew me right in. So I'd love to let people have you just kind of take us through your story, which is full of twists and turns throughout your life, not just through a midlife pivot or anything like that, but you've got a really great story. So I'm going to let you take us on a little journey here.
Okay, well, where would you like me to start?
Well, I think it's really interesting that I know that you had kids prior to starting law school. And I know you were homeschooling them. So why don't we go from there and then kind of see where we get to?
Sure. Well, I guess we do have a sort of unusual route to getting where we are today. My husband, Mike, and I married when we were 18. Wow. And we had our first child when we were 20. And, fast forward through various things, we ended up surprisingly with 5 kids. And when our youngest was a year old, we left Nebraska, where we had lived for, 10 years or so, to go to New York for me to start law school. And in the interim, I had gone back to finish my undergrad degree. And so we were ready for the next step. We moved from Nebraska to New York, where I started law school at Cornell in Ithaca. And yeah, during that period of time, I had been homeschooling my older kids and continued that during my first year of law school
Oh my
there.
goodness.
Which was interesting. I would not recommend starting homeschooling your first year of law school, but I'd been doing it for nearly 10 years at that point. So we had a pretty good system in place and a pretty good
Okay.
routine.
Yeah.
And my oldest at that time was that was her freshman year of high school, and so she was pretty independent. My second was a couple years behind her, but both of them, they were the ones that were most actively being homeschooled, and they were pretty self-directed at that point. I mean, I had the curriculum chosen for them and I worked with them, but I could get them started and they would work on their stuff while I went to school, and then I'd come back and work with them. So it wasn't as intensive as, say, working with an elementary school age kid that
Sure. Yeah.
would need you to be right there with them the whole time.
Boy, I mean, I'm just so interested in this. I could almost like change gears and talk about homeschooling because I wish I was built to do homeschooling. I know kind of thought about it with my kids who are now 13 and 16, and I am just not. I just know my limits, and I'm not built that way. And now all of a sudden, we're all homeschooling in our own weird ways. But I'm so grateful and thankful that my kids are older, as you said, and less needy, and they just get on and they kind of do their thing. I feel for all the parents out there who have younger kids and are trying to balance work and school and the whole thing.
Yeah,
Crazy.
it's been a real interesting year for a lot of people. Our oldest daughter has four little girls. Her oldest is, in junior high now or middle school,
Wow.
and her youngest is, I think she's kindergarten. Um, but they had a period of time where they were having to do school from home. And I will say, and then I know this isn't the point of this particular conversation, but as a side note, for those who are dealing with this, remote schooling, like a lot of people are having to do it during the COVID pandemic, is a world of difference from homeschooling. And
Mhm.
I it to my in my opinion, it's much, much harder than actually homeschooling. So I feel for you.
Yeah. Wow. Oh my goodness. And again, I'm just like really the perfect name of your podcast, The Productive Woman. Like I can't imagine like you've got 5 kids and you're going to law school and then how long did it take you to finish law school?
It's a 3-year program. And
Okay.
so just the first year I was homeschooling, but like I said, other than teaching one of the younger ones to read during that year, the older ones were much more self-directed and self-sufficient. And in fairness, though, I have to say, it's not that I'm superwoman. I have an amazing family, and in particular, an amazing husband who really, really stepped up. I could not have survived law school and done the things that I have done since then if Mike hadn't been willing to step up and sort of step into some of the things that I had done for the 10 years previous to that, where I was home full time, homeschooling, cooking the food, doing all the stuff.
Mhm.
Um, and when we made this decision as a family to sort of switch gears and do this other thing, everybody stepped up to help. But in particular, Mike really, he just really stepped up.
Wow. Yeah, and I imagine how else could you have done it, right?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it really takes a team to do something like that. So
Yeah. Wow. And then when you finished law school, you got a position right away, it sounds like, right?
yeah, it was a very different world back then. This was in the late 90s, and the legal market was very different even than it is today. And I was at a good school, and I had done well at that school. So I started work right, like a week after I graduated from law school, we moved to Texas, and I actually moved down ahead of time to start studying for the bar and working for the firm that had hired me. And Mike stayed behind in New York for the kids to finish the school year, and then move all our stuff down to
Wow.
Texas.
Wow. That is quite a journey. So how long were you down in Texas by yourself?
I'm trying to think. I graduated, in May, right before Mother's Day or right around Mother's Day. Left and drove down to Texas. And I think Mike and the kids came in, um, I want to say June or July.
Yeah, I was
Maybe
going to
it
say
was
that's
maybe
not
closer to the end
too
of July.
bad, huh?
No,
Yeah.
it wasn't terrible. I had a week or two of staying with some friends down there while I looked for a house. And we were just going to rent. We didn't want to buy until we were more familiar with the area and figured out where we wanted to live. And so I pretty quickly found us a house to rent. And then I was there for a month, maybe 6 weeks before the rest of the family and all our stuff showed up.
Wow, amazing. And I mean, your bio like I'm looking at your bio and all of a sudden your partner, how long did that take?
Well, it takes a few years.
Yeah.
I think I'd been at it for 7 years, maybe.
Yeah. Wow.
Um, when I made partner, it varies from firm to firm how long it takes. I was at a large firm, and the larger firms tend to take a little bit longer.
Hmm.
I think nowadays it's more like 8 years, 8 or 9 years, at least in Texas. In New York firms, it's even longer, I think.
Yeah. Wow, wow. So that's a lot. So by the time you made partner, how old are your kids by then? Or your youngest, let's say?
Our youngest was, I think, sixth grade. I actually made partner at a firm in Seattle because in the middle of all this, when I was a few years into it, I was recruited away, and we moved back to Western Washington, which is where Mike and I are originally from.
Right.
And I joined a firm in Seattle as an associate. And I think it was a year, maybe 2 years later, they made me a partner. And so at that point, our two oldest kids were out on their own. Our second child, actually, our oldest son, was in the United States Navy at that point. Um, I think Ben, our middle child, second son, was in high school at that point, and so our youngest was, you know, maybe fifth or sixth grade.
Hmm. Wow. So, at some point, I know that you start now. You and I talked a little bit before, and you said you've been writing fiction
Hmm.
since forever, right? But you decided to finally get going on a novel that you'd been tossing about, and I think that was probably when you were about 52, right? Were the kids how old was your youngest by then?
He was, I think, in high school at that
Hmm.
point. So our two youngest were in high school around the time that I did that. And it was, like you said, I've wanted to write since I was a kid, and I've played with writing stories and had lots of ideas, but I had never really sat down and finished a novel. It's something I had always wanted to do. But had never managed to make the time to do it. And I, finally kind of had some realizations in my early 50s that the reason I never did it was because I was afraid of failing. It was such a dream of mine that in the sort of subconscious says, well, if you never try, you can't fail. Then you
Hmm.
can always say, I could have done it. But if you try and it sucks, then that dream is dead.
Yeah.
And I had to sort of work through that, and just decided in my early 50s, you know what, I'm going to write it. Maybe it'll never get published, but I don't want to reach the end of my life and say I never finished a novel. And so I picked an idea and sat down and started writing it. And I think it took me about a year to basically get it finished. As I told you before, it needs quite a bit of editing because it's like 100-some thousand words, and it's
Wow.
way too long. It's women's fiction, and it needs to be more like 85-90,000 words, and so it needs some editing and some tweaking and that sort of thing. But at least I reached my goal of kind of getting through a first draft of a novel. And
That's amazing. What did you do to get yourself past that fear?
that's a great question, because I don't know if there's any one thing I can point to. I think it was a lot of uh, reading that I'd done, stuff written by other writers about the writing process. And I'm a bookworm, and I read lots of different things, lots of things that I guess would fall into the self-help category. And I just started thinking about, what, I'm reaching this age of my life, and all my life I've wanted to do this thing, and I've talked myself out of it or let myself be scared. That's not how I want to end my life. I maybe I will suck at it, but I've got to at least say I tried, that I did this thing, that I wrote the thing. Whether anybody else ever reads it or not is not the point. The point is to be able to look back and say, okay, I did this thing. And I did. I at one point, I know I had a lunch with, or dinner with a published author that I knew, and I actually hired her to just read through what I had written so far and give me, am I on the wrong track? Am I crazy to think I can do this? And she read it and gave me some feedback, and some things I could do to make it better, but some very encouraging feedback, and that really helped me keep going.
That's great. Yeah, boy, amazing what a difference I imagine that must have been to have an outside eye of somebody you respected give you that kind of encouragement.
Yeah, and I think that that concept can apply to anybody in kind of any area where something you want to do that you're not 100% sure you've got the right stuff. Finding somebody who's successful in that area, and hiring them as a coach. In almost any endeavor, there are people who you can hire to give you feedback, to be sort of that dispassionate eye looking at what you're doing and helping you kind of, I don't know, craft the direction you're going to go, giving you ideas about how you can do it, helping you think through the process. That can be hugely helpful.
Yeah. That is something that it's a running theme as I interview people. This idea of having a coach or some sort of support
Yeah.
to help get you through it. Because I know for me, I held myself back in so many ways for so long,
Mhm.
trying to do things myself and bootstrap it all alone.
Yeah.
And in this past year, have I had a couple of different coaches, and I mean, it's just been, and just reaching out to people and asking for help. That is something that I've taken on as a challenge for myself this year, to ask for help and offer help
Yeah.
more. What a difference it's made in my
Yeah. Well,
life.
most of us are not very good judges of our own capabilities,
Hmm.
or of, and we're not very good at sort of seeing the big picture. We get very kind of stuck in our head. It's interesting to me, is you may know this, that the concept of imposter syndrome, and how
Mm.
many women in particular, and specifically very successful women that you would look from the outside and think, wow, she's so accomplished and so successful and looks so confident. Those are the women most likely to suffer from imposter syndrome. And we just are not very good judges of our own accomplishments and our own capabilities. And so having somebody um, who is on the outside, who doesn't have an emotional investment in us or what we're trying to do, to give us their perspective on it, can make all the difference in the world. It doesn't work to go, to our mother who loves us and thinks everything we do is fabulous, or even our friends or our spouses or significant others. They can't necessarily be objective enough, where someone else, who sort of does this for a living, or who's got the experience and the qualifications in the area that you're wanting to get into, they can give you that objective look at what we're trying to accomplish and our ability to do it, and maybe help us see ways around the obstacles, whether internal or external, that we just can't see for ourselves.
And so true to have it, how important it is to look beyond your immediate family and really close friendships, because a lot of times in their love of you and wanting to protect you, a lot of times they're going to be looking at things that, and looking at it from a way of keeping you safe, and instead of helping you grow.
So true.
So
And it's easy for you to, if they give you positive feedback, it becomes very easy for you to dismiss it, because he loves me or she loves me, so of course they're going to say that. They don't know.
So true. Oh my goodness. And one of the other things besides coaching that I've stepped into this year is working with some other small business owners who, and kind of masterminding with people, and working through little, coming together and saying, okay, I'm working on this thing and I'm kind of stopped here, and just having somebody else who understands what you're going through, and maybe a step ahead of you in one area, you may be a step ahead of them in another area, and you're able to kind of help each other out that way. It's pretty.
Yeah, that can be such a help. Just getting other people's perspectives, whether from whatever, because we all come at things from a different perspective, depending on our background and our training and our personality and all of these things. And so a group like you've described can really make a difference. That's something I've done over the last few years. I've been a member of a small group of women who are writers, who we meet every other week for an hour or so via Zoom, because we're in different parts of the country, and, share ideas, share struggles, brainstorm solutions for each other, give feedback on things that we're trying to do. And again, it's that sort of outside perspective that can make all the difference.
So I'm curious, when you got started with this, how long have you been doing this?
The mastermind group I'm part of, that particular one, I think we've been doing it for going on 3 years now. And
okay, so you guys were Zoom trailblazers. You were Zoom before Zoom was 2020 Zoom.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
That one I got involved in just because the two women that were kind of friends and decided they'd like to put something like this together. One of them knew someone who knew me, who suggested I might be a good fit for what they were trying to do. And so they reached out to me and invited me to be a part of it. And it's one of those things where the other women in the group have all been published, in some cases more than once, several cases more than once. And so I felt and still sometimes feel a little, like, what am I doing in here? I'm a big phony because I haven't been published in that way,
Right. But so funny. You just answered my question. I was literally going to say, how did you feel joining that group? Was it, were you nervous? Or?
Well, I was nervous. I thought maybe it was a mistake that they had invited me, that they didn't understand. but it's not so much, the mastermind isn't so much just about writing, although everybody either everybody in the group does write. They felt like I had things to contribute, both because of my, in writing endeavors, but also um, the stuff I do with my podcast. And so they, I have different things to contribute to the conversation than a woman in the group who has been, has had multiple novels published. So you just sort of begin to understand we all have something to contribute to the conversation.
Absolutely. And you just provided me with the perfect segue, because I wanted to get to your podcast, because my question is, okay, so you're a lawyer, you're a mother and a grandmother, and you're writing your novel, and I think you're writing other pieces too, correct? You've got some other
Yeah.
writing you're doing besides,
Yes.
right? And then so what prompted you to start a podcast? I mean, I will speak as a podcaster. It's a lot of work. So what prompted you to then take on yet another thing?
Well, it's a funny question. This was back in, I started thinking about this probably back in early 2013. And at the time, I was commuting an hour or more each way to my office, my law office. And anybody who you talk to who's a lawyer will tell you that if you let it, the practice of law can take up every brain cell and every bit of time, energy, and attention you have. And I was kind of thinking about wanting to do something not related to the practice of law. The writing thing I did sort of a little bit here and there, but where it all started was maybe a year before that, a blogger that I followed and liked a lot talked about launching a podcast. And my response at the time was, what's a podcast? I had no idea.
Right.
But he launched his and I started listening to it. And from his, different guests that he had, I started listening to other people's podcasts. And I got to thinking, that might be something I could do. It just seems like it would be fun to do and interesting in a way that I could sort of, I don't know, express a different side of myself than my law practice allows for. And so this all was sort of developing in my mind. And so at the end of 2013, I just decided to go for it. And I signed up for a course that a particular kind of podcasting expert offered at the time. He doesn't do it anymore, but it was a 30-day sort of online thing with weekly, Skype chat kind of for the group that took you from an idea for a podcast all the way through getting set up and doing all the various steps you needed to do, your artwork and your gear and everything, through recording your first episode. And I decided to spend the money to do that. And so I did. And with the goal, the intention of, this was December of 2013 that I did it, with the intention that I would launch my podcast in the first week of January of 2014. So I went through the course, I did all the stuff, got my, had someone create the artwork that you have to have, the cover art, had my husband, who's a musician, create my theme music, did all the stuff, and then did not launch. I had a website created, but I did nothing for various reasons. And fast forward to June of 2014, and I still hadn't launched my podcast. I actually stopped listening to podcasts because I felt so bad that I had spent all this time and money to do this, and I hadn't done it. And I finally, it's sort of the same thing as with respect to writing. I realized at some point in June, my problem was I was afraid to launch. I had come up with lots of reasons why I couldn't do it, wasn't ready, even though I had all the pieces in place. And I was afraid people would think it was dumb. People would think who does she think she is? I don't know what I was
Oh
thinking.
yeah.
And I
Been there.
finally, yeah. And so there was one day late in June when I was driving somewhere and I thought, well, I'm going to listen to one of Cliff's podcast episodes. Cliff Ravenscraft was the guy whose course I had taken. And it just happened that the episode I listened to was addressing this very thing, this being afraid to start, feeling like you had nothing to contribute, and all this. I cried through the whole episode.
Oh my gosh.
And I think it was the next day I decided, you know what, I'm going to do it. And so I walked in. I didn't even have all my expensive gear set up. I took my iPad into my walk-in closet and recorded a 5-minute episode on my iPad. I was in the closet because good acoustics.
Yep. Good acoustics. Yep.
Yeah. Recorded a 5-minute episode saying, this is who I am. This is what my podcast is going to be about. And I will be back next week with a real episode. And I didn't even edit that thing. I just published it straight from my iPad up to iTunes, because I knew if I had waited to edit it or do anything, I would chicken out.
Yeah.
And you can still find that episode in iTunes. It was terrible, but it was, and
I find that to be so inspiring. And I think people should go back and, you know what I mean? Go back, listen to that, and then listen to one of the newer ones. I bet you there's such a world of difference, I bet, right?
Well, there should be. One hopes. I committed to, being back the next week with an episode, and my goal or my commitment to myself was to try and do a little better each week. And I've been doing it ever since, every week since July 1st of 2014.
Do you have, here's a question for you, and I think I might know the answer to it, but do you have perfectionist tendencies?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Me too.
and nobody can live up to that standard, And so I have to just ignore the voice in my head that says that sucks. What I've learned from 6 years of podcasting is that I cannot tell when my episodes are good or not, because the ones that I've thought, well, this one really bites, nobody's going to, that this will be the end of my podcast. Those are the ones.
As if it all hinges on one, right?
But that's
right. But yeah,
stuff we say to ourselves,
right? Yeah.
Those episodes that I think are the weakest are almost uniformly the ones that I get the most positive feedback about. So I'm like, okay, well, I have no clue. Then all I can do is just, give my best effort in as far as choosing topics that I think are going to be of interest to the women who listen to my show, do my best to make it a good episode, and leave it in the hands of the listeners at that point. Cause I just have no clue.
Yeah. There's one thing I've learned as a recovering perfectionist, which I suppose I will always be, is, in the past couple of years, I read something somewhere, heard somebody say, you know what, there's not even, it's such a false thing. There's no such thing as perfection. It just it doesn't even exist. So what are you doing? And the other thing is, I came across the term in a class at some point that was imperfect action is better than perfect inaction.
Yeah.
And now my resounding thing that I tell myself is done is better than perfect.
Exactly.
So just get it done and just keep putting it out there, and sooner or later you have a body of work and you've done something,
Yeah. And it's been such when I first launched, I thought, well, my mom will probably listen because she loves me. But there was no reason for anybody else to listen. What I hoped in doing it wasn't a case of, okay, I have all this expertise in productivity and let me bless the world with my, great wisdom. It wasn't that. I wanted to put something out there to let if anybody listened, to let them know, you know what, you're not alone in struggling to get the things done that are important to you. Here's a few things that I've learned that might help, but I'll bet you know some things too that might help me. And I have a guest about once a month, and it's always a woman who's willing to come and share, here's what works for me, here's where I struggle. And I feel like if we can have these conversations, we can all help each other kind of get through the things we're trying to accomplish.
Right on.
But I apologize, my dog is going to bark now because the UPS guy just showed up.
That's okay. My last episode, her kitty cat started going crazy about 45. It was great. It just heard the kitty cat in the background. Meow, 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 meow.
Thank heavens for editors.
Right. Or I may leave it in. Sometimes I like to leave the imperfections in once again, because I'm like, you know what? People need to hear that. And here we are. We're all home in a closet or whatever, doing our best, and wearing our pajamas on the bottom and our nice looking clothes on top for Zoom calls. That's what it is. It's fine.
Yeah. Well, I guess the point I wanted to make was, that's what I wanted to accomplish, was to reach out and maybe serve women in some way by letting them know, nobody's got it all figured out, but we all have pieces that we can contribute to the conversation. What's been so gratifying to me is the community that has built up around the podcast, and the feedback I get from listeners literally all around the world. And I a couple years into it, started a private Facebook group for my listeners, and seeing them support and help each other. That a woman will post a question or something she's struggling with, and before I can even get there to offer feedback, other women from all over the place are jumping in saying, I feel that same way. Here's something that works for me, and that it might work for you too. And that is just so gratifying to me, to see that community supporting and helping each other, which is all I ever wanted to accomplish with the podcast.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. I want to back up a little bit, because you went from being a podcast listener to suddenly it sounds almost like suddenly deciding you wanted to do a podcast. How did you land on the idea of looking at productivity? How did that come about for you?
Well, as I was thinking about, going from the idea of, I might like to have a podcast, the next question, of course, was, well, what would I talk about? Mm-hmm. Well, I've been a productivity nerd, I will call myself, since I was, a kid, probably at least in middle school, if not before. This is terrible. I mean, this is what a nerd I am. I would, even in, 6th, 7th grade, I would go to the library and pull books on time management and organization and stuff like that off the shelves and sit and read them. And I loved charts and calendars and lists and all that kind of stuff. I was always interested in that, and trying different things. And of course, that knowledge that I gained and the things that worked and didn't work certainly stood me in good stead as I got older and got married and started a family and all.
Clearly, yeah, that's what's allowed you to do everything you've done.
Absolutely. Knowing that kind of stuff, and a lifelong learner. I still to this day love reading books about that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And as I got older and started my law practice as a woman of a certain age, the younger women in the firm would come to me at different times and ask, well, how do you have a family and succeed as a lawyer? I just had my first child, or I just found out I'm pregnant with my first child. How am I going to do all this? And I'd have conversations with them and brainstorm solutions and share what I knew. And so all of that was the backdrop as I started thinking about starting a podcast. I thought, what can I talk about? I'm not going to talk about real estate law. I don't want to do anything related to my law practice, but I thought, here's something that I'm interested in, that I know other people want to learn about. So this is something I could talk about without having to, go out and learn some new subject. So it just really was that. It was, I want to do a podcast. This is something I'm interested in and know something about. So I could probably do something like this. And as I looked out there, there are other, and there were before I started, other productivity podcasts, but most of them at that time, and maybe still today, most of them were hosted by men, generally young men who worked from home and or and were either single or had a wife who kind of took care of all the stuff. And so, and I can say this because I'm friends with a lot of those guys now, and I've been on their podcasts, and we've had this conversation that they had a lot to contribute, but their perspective was very different from mine as a woman with a family and a career. And the things that they would suggest doing, I would think, okay, well, that's awesome, but I have to get up and go to work tomorrow. I don't have 100% control over my schedule, and I can't, sit and meditate for an hour and a half in the morning, or whatever the situation is. And so I felt like I could bring a little bit different perspective to the subject of productivity than these guys who, as I said, I now consider friends.
Yeah. And I love this whole thing. I think there's such a great lesson in here for anybody listening, that you took something that for you is I kind of like your superpower, if we'll put it that way. This is something that you're good at, interested in. And did you always realize that other people maybe had challenges around this? Because I'm one of those people. Any kind of productivity that I manage, I was the kid that always got needs improvement on my report card when it came to time management. It was so frustrating. I kind of have to whip myself into shape to get things done. I've tried to be a lot kinder to myself as I try to figure out how to do that. But at what point did you figure out at some point that other people were challenged by this, or did you kind of always know that?
Well, it's some of both. First of all, I don't consider myself an expert, and I don't position myself on the podcast as the expert. I am a fellow traveler. I'm always trying to do better at, I may know lots of things in certain areas, like I can talk about the apps that work for me and things like that, and how to put a to-do list together. There are certain skills that I've learned over the years that I've out of, self-preservation to survive, raising kids and going to school and all these other things. But I don't have a perfectly productive life. What I had to, and so I wasn't trying to tell anybody I have a perfectly productive life. A lot of the topics that I cover on the show come out of my own, something I'm noodling on or struggling with or trying to get better at. And so I'll go out and research, all right, what could I do why can't I get myself to write this book proposal that an agent has asked to see for a nonfiction book about productivity? What do I need to do to get myself, overcome the inertia or the fear or whatever is holding me back and make progress on that? And so I'll research that and talk about it. What I had to learn in terms of other people's struggles is the things that I think are so basic that aren't worth talking about. I have found that they actually are worth talking about. The things that I have that I learned many, many years ago that I think everybody knows those things. Everybody doesn't know those things. And so I get encouraged by different listeners or different people, that it's okay to go back and talk about those things that I think are so elementary that everybody knows.
Right. Yes. Yes. And I guess that's exactly where I'm coming from is I think that, I guess what I'm thinking for my audience is like, if there's something that if there's something that somebody wants to do, or if somebody's feeling like, oh, I wish I could start a business, but I don't know what I'd do. And, a lot of times I think it's about looking at the things that are basic to you,
Mm-hmm.
that other people come to you for maybe advice,
Yeah.
or they, the things, don't overlook, I guess, what's easy for you and think it's not valuable.
Yeah. I think of that in terms of uh, my husband, who is a brilliant musician. Now, he works right now as an engineer because he had a midlife pivot too, and went back to school and got a second set of degrees in engineering. But he was born a brilliant musician. His parents knew he had musical ability when he was 2 or 3 years old, when he had one of those hideous drag around toy xylophones that kids get that just drive parents crazy. And as a 2 or 3 year old, he would sit and play songs on that he had heard. He's just
Wow.
very gifted. And it took him years to realize, and it took me telling him, we met in a music group when we were teenagers, uh, telling him many times that the things that he can do are extraordinary. He would say, well, any good musician can do X, can listen to a song and tell you what key it's in and write it out, notate it. I said, I'm sorry, dude, I'm a good musician and I can't do that. There's lots of people who are good musicians that can't do that. And so that these things that come so easily to you that you think, well, everybody already knows that, or anybody could do that. Probably that's probably not true. And so you're absolutely right. Sometimes having someone else to talk to, who can point out that this thing that you're good at is something other people struggle with, and you have something to contribute there, can be a great place to start. That and things that you're just really interested in.
Yes. Yes. Which is, one of the questions I guess I wanted to ask you is like, if what do you think, like if somebody were to be feeling a little stuck and not sure what step to take next in midlife, do you have any kind of thoughts on how somebody could kind of move through that kind of stuck point?
Well, I guess a couple of things come to mind. One of them is what we've just been talking about. Try to look back and think about times you've been doing something that you've been completely absorbed in it, and just time kind of ceased to exist because you just thought it was so interesting or so fun or whatever. There may be something there. But I think beyond that, if you're really stuck and you can't, you want to do something different, you want to make a change, but you're not sure what, I think most of the time we actually do know, but we're afraid to admit it to ourselves because we think other people will think it's dumb or, whatever. So sometimes finding someone to talk to, and again, maybe you can ask your friends, what am I good at? What would you say I'm good at? What do you think? What would you say my strengths are? They can tell you that.
Mm-hmm.
But armed with that information, sometimes having someone sort of unrelated to you, an outsider, hiring a coach for a couple of sessions to kind of think through this stuff with you and say, well, this is what other people say. They might be able to help you kind of uncover what you should do with that, help you uncover what you actually want to do with that, but can't even admit to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. And what if somebody kind of knows, like, let's say somebody's got a novel in them that they've been, or they just want to sit down and write that novel. Any advice for somebody who just has something that's like a bucket list thing? They know they've always wanted to do it, but for whatever reason, like, I gotta think that for you, part of it had to have been bandwidth on top of the fear, just, not I mean, my gosh, you had so much going on. Here you are going to law school and raising kids and then, you know, getting into a law firm and then working your way up to partner. There's a lot going on there. But somebody gets to a point and they realize, okay, maybe that bandwidth is starting to open up, but I'm still stuck. Any words of, anything that worked for you to push you past that?
I think you just have to give yourself permission to do it badly. That was an issue for me. We talked earlier about perfectionism. My entire life, I have missed out on opportunities because I really couldn't bear to do things badly where somebody else could see see it. So I would sit on the sidelines rather with little things, even as like back in high school when I was out, with at an event with friends, not jumping in to play basketball with the group or do something like that because I knew I couldn't do it well, or was pretty sure I couldn't do it well, and I didn't want anybody to see me do it badly.
Mm-hmm.
I had to give myself permission to do it badly. And for me, writing when we're talking about writing the novel, same thing I had to do with writing first drafts of papers for school. I would give myself permission to do it badly, but this is how bad I was. I would write as I'm typing, I would type in there, yes, I know this is terrible. I'll fix it later, because I didn't want, if I were to drop dead, I didn't want somebody to find it and think I thought it was good. So I would type that in it. Yes, I realize this sucks really badly, but I'll fix it later, and then keep going. Just spew it out onto the page. That's knowing that you can fix it later. Or, if a podcast, record it knowing that this is probably terrible, but it can be edited and I'll do better next week.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That's such good advice. Oh my goodness. I know I want to respect your time and I keep talking about all this forever. I'm going to ask you a couple, one little thing, like, is there a book or a movie or some teacher? What's been formative for you?
Oh my goodness. There's a lot of things. I mean, if I had to choose one book, aside from, say, the Bible, that's really been important to me in my thinking about being productive, it probably would be Greg McKeown's book, Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less.
I keep hearing more and more about that. I need to check that one out. Okay.
It's one that I reread periodically because it just really was transformative in terms of my thinking about being productive. The other thing that comes to mind in terms of a resource that's really made a difference for me it is actually a podcast that I found that I would listen to while I drove, and it's called the Life Coach School podcast, hosted by Brooke Castillo.
Yes, you turned me on to one of your podcasts. You mentioned her, and I started listening, and that has also been very transformative for me. Thank you. I'm going to thank you now.
So much. Well, thank her, because I talk about it frequently because it made such a difference. The things that she talks about, it really, she was a starting point for me to realize that I could control what goes on in my head, and that I can control how I feel by controlling what goes on in my head. That concept really was life-changing for me. Yes. And I still, to this day, she's where I go when I start to get kind of I don't know, down on myself or my thinking gets messed up, when I get to the end of her podcast, I go back to number one and just start over. I've listened to, her whole series. I mean, she keeps recording new ones, but I've gone back and started over many times because it's just so it made such a difference in my ability, my realization that I am not at the mercy of whatever thoughts come into my head, that I can actually look at them and say, okay, that's an interesting thought, but I don't believe that. I'm going to think about how I feel when I think that is not the way I want to feel. So I'm going to think about this other thing instead.
Yes, that whole idea of looking at separating circumstance and fact from what you're thinking about that fact or circumstance, and then how that thought is making you. I mean, the whole thing. People go listen. The Life Coach School, Brooke Castillo, pretty darn amazing.
Yeah, and it sounds like it would be only for people who want to be life coaches, but it's not.
Exactly. Yep, that I agree wholeheartedly. That's very cool. Is there anything you're reading now, or any shows you're binging on? I don't know that you have time to binge.
I do periodically. My husband and I, we both have lots of interests and work commitments and stuff. So we always try to have some TV show that we'll watch together, and that will sort of, whenever we have time to sit down and watch TV, we'll watch certain shows together. And we really liked Person of Interest, which is, you can see on, I think it's Netflix is where you can find it. That is one of my favorite shows that we've watched. Right now we're watching, as they come out, the new season of The Mandalorian and also Star Trek Discovery. But as far as books, right now, what I'm really fascinated by and enjoying is I recently listened to and liked so much that I bought the hard copy cover of a book by a guy named David McCraney, and it's called "You Are Not So Smart." And the subtitle is "Why You Have Too Many Friends on Facebook, Why Your Memory is Mostly Fiction, and 46 Other Ways You're Deluding Yourself." It's fascinating look at the things we believe about ourselves that aren't true. And I love that one so much that he has a newer one out that's called "You Are Now Less Dumb." And it's kind of a continuation of that. They're fascinating books that are really useful to help understand kind of our current times and how without getting into politics, there's a lot of rancor on social media and TV, and people who believe one way hate the people who believe another way. And this book really makes you think about what you think about truth and your own mental capacity and other people's thinking and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, boy, the world would be a whole other different place if we would all stop and really question ourselves more often, and what we, question our beliefs and what we think and to be true, and really take a step back and consider the possibility that maybe we're wrong. Could be.
Yeah. Yes.
Wow, that's very cool. Well, I'm very excited to go check those out. What is coming up for you that you're excited about, or what do you want people to know about?
Oh my goodness. I'm, just still trying to navigate through a different world, the different world that we're all living in because of COVID. I'm hoping to host some in-person planning retreats for women in my Productive Woman community in the months to come, as soon as people can travel again. So I'm looking forward to that. We're planning some, small in-person retreat kinds of things. I'm looking forward to that. I think I can safely say on this podcast, because hopefully none of my youngest daughters friends will hear it before she announces it next week at Thanksgiving dinner. But our younger daughter, she and her husband are expecting their first child.
Oh, that's so exciting. Well, this will not go out into the world before then anyway, before
Okay,
she
good.
makes her announcement. So you're safe. So this may come out sometime in December, I'm going to guess. I still have to kind of figure that out. But so now how many grandkids is that going to be?
Well, that'll be number 9 unless somebody else surprises us.
Oh, wow. So fun. That'll keep you good and busy, huh? That's exciting.
Yes.
Now, how can people find you? And I will put stuff in the show notes as well, including the books that we've talked about and different things like that.
Oh, probably the easiest way would be to go to the website, which is at theproductivewoman.com. And there's a contact page that you can send me a message. I'm on Facebook and some other social media places too, but the easiest way is just to go to the website there, and there you can see what's going on and get in touch with me that way. And I love hearing from people. So
great. Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. I'm so very happy to have had you on.
Well, it's my privilege to be here. So thank you for having me.
Well, there you have it. If you want to know more about Laura, I'll have that information for you in the show notes, of course. Just go to latebloomerliving.com/podcast and click on the show notes for episode 29. Thanks so much for listening. Hey, if you got something out of this today, can you take a minute to share this with someone you love? I'd really appreciate your help in spreading the word about the podcast. By the way, next week, I'm doing a short solo show to close out the year. Let's say goodbye to 2020. I hope you'll join me, and I hope you'll find new ways to celebrate with your family this year. I love you guys. Stay safe and well. Talk soon.